does, right? We measure entropy or whatever, brightness, whatever we want of every image. So we get these continuous measurements, and then we visualize 1 million manga pages according to this measurement, and you get completely continuous field because it captures always minute differences. So in reality, we maybe clusters here, maybe styles here, but the kind of measurements I'm using also not capturing them. So that may be also opposite problem, because maybe feature extraction captures too many differences. It may capture differences which are not consequential to human perception. Anyway, so this is the last thing I want to say. I think this is it. And so that's the kind of end. So basically, right, basically that was, and just one more thing, no, we don't see it, it's okay. So this is basically, right, what we want to remember from my talk. So maybe we should ask if we're actually using big data and computation correctly, because it's all based on aggregation, which is how statistics developed in the 19th century. That's also how humanity developed in the 19th century. When you postulate periods in art, you aggregate. Yeah? So you basically focus on what's common between the objects, and you call it category, you call it cluster, and you don't include what includes frequently. And the question is, maybe it's useful sometimes to also try this approach, include everything, pay attention to infrequent, identify small cultural islands, and also kind of question similarity, because when you try to measure similarity between cultural artifacts, periods, and so on, you may capture very important things, but it's also possible that because of these problems, we don't capture something which is very important. Thank you so much. Sorry, I think I took way more time, but that's it.
Thank you so much, Lev. I would like to open the discussion period.
Can I sit here? Or?
Yes, you can sit there,
yeah,
but it's probably better that you keep the relation with the video program, because if someone wants to remind you.
But what about somebody maybe wants to keep relationship to your because also but people want to ask you.
No. Nobody has nothing to ask me. But I wanted only to say
I have anything to ask. Okay, but maybe I need to think about it first. I actually have lots of things to ask about some quotes. Anyway,
but I wanted only to say something before the discussion period, because I don't want to manipulate time and here in this conference. But I wanted to only to say that I think that I see some similarities in our two talks. I think that the similarity, the most important, is the continuity, the interest in continuity, continuous measurement, and continuity in the metamorphosis of forms. I think that continuity is the key word of our talks, because continuity can protect ourselves from the easy similarities.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted also to ask you something I thought about when I was studying your work. It's about cross-verification, because you told us that we can describe the unicity if we increase the number of categories. Many categories.
But for example, but sometimes in a field where you have 5 categories, to replace in 50 would be actually a step forward.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
And categories, of course, are useful. That's how we think.
Yes, but I think that we can think about the cross referentiation through many categories as a negative description, negative in the sense of structuralism, a negative description of the singularity. I want to mean that if we want to describe the singularity of a work of art,
yes,
we can look at every diagrams that include this image, and to make a negative description through the difference that we can see in every diagrams that include this image.
Yes, I see. Yes. Well, you know, maybe to say the same thing a bit differently, right? So, I mean, we know, right? I think, I see most people here know, but maybe I don't know yet, right? So, if you think about each feature, right, is a dimension of space. So, if we measure 100 features, we have 100-dimensional space. So, you can say uniqueness of a particular cultural artifact, like image, would be basically also coordinates in the space, but maybe you're talking about something else. You're not talking measurements on absolute scale, you're talking about differences between distances to other images, right? With distances to other clusters. Is that important?
Yes, what is interesting is the process of emerging of singularity, I think. And it's only by cross parameterization that is possible, I think. Yes. So.
Thank you so much. I have to think about it.
Please share your
because
comments.
Because I had no breakfast, so.
Yes. So please share your comments.
Sorry, I don't know. It's not right now.
To level.
It was connected. Now it's not connected. No, it's not connected now.
Somebody. Yes, sir.
I stand up.
Yes.
Thank you very much for organizing the conference and for the talk. I have maybe more than I would have a lot of questions, but just one. I was thinking while listening to you, this kind of question: what effect big data analysis could have on the production and ontology of cultural artifacts themselves? And I mean, if the interaction between big data and individualization, my algorithm, creates a profile, could in the future could we imagine in the future panorama where, for example, the songs that are listed on Spotify are modified based on what I like? If the analysis of my preferences told Spotify that I prefer to listen to the voice of the singer at a certain level and not at another, could we imagine, for example, that artificial intelligence could create a mix of the song different for each person? Or, for example, photographs of models that are presenting clothes different for each person. So I prefer to see pictures of a woman with black hair and not blonde hair. So the algorithm proposed me a picture tailored for my preferences.
So in other words, so we're talking about, because now, like, I think AI, right? AI, the same neural networks, but not convolutional ones. I think we're having good success in the music field, right? So I'm not like, I don't have music education, but at least I hear, so we say, okay, we can take like Mozart and then generate new Mozart, but using rhythm of Brahms. To me, it sounds convincing, but I'm not expert. I think it's really possible, for example, in music, which is a one-dimensional signal, and I don't see, given where things are going, right, and again, we're a real computer scientist here and a fake one, I think it's all very possible, right? And again, look at the so-called deepfakes, right? So you have a person who is like saying things, right, which he didn't say. I think maybe a more interesting question is, let's say, right, so you can use computers, combination of, machine learning and machine learning to extract features, to categorize, predictive analytics, AI. You can use all these things to create infinite number of different artifacts or infinite versions, right? The question is, how infinite is your imagination? So, I published a short book at the end of 2017. It's, if you want, I can share a PDF with you all. It actually costs $250 on Amazon, but I can share PDF for free. Where I basically talk, what about the effect of recommendation systems and big data on our taste and imagination, right? In other words, because with recommendation algorithms, even though really custom, one of the main signals we use is that this image was liked by other people. So I'm going to show it. So for example, when I look at my recommendation page on Instagram, I don't see any bad images, right? Like, meaning, you know, we not necessarily like one style, but we're always good, we're always sharp, we have all been done with professional cameras. So it kind of becomes impossible to see bad image, right? And bad image, you know, maybe grainy image is maybe very interesting, a kind of poor image. So the fact is that, you know, like how when people can continue to exposed, right, to these perfect things, right, or things in particular, you know, which prefer particular styles, narratives, and so on, are you going to desire something different, right? And what I want to say is, you know, I think when I was thinking when I was talking, right, I think it applies to your question and to my question and to what you said. I think maybe what we need to do is to really become friends with psychologists and start making experiments. Like, you know, I suggested, for example, right? So, for example, right, you know, we give you like some repertoire of forms and see what you imagine. You know, and like I give people 100 images and say, okay, put these images on the table, tell us familiarity. So then we can actually see if our representations respond to what people say. And the last thing I want to say, sorry, jumping, you remember this thing called Second Life? Used to be, right? Second Life.
Second Life, yes.
Yeah, Second Life was it still exists, but it was very popular like 10 years ago, virtual space, where people, anybody can come and build like houses, and can build whole like, cities, etc. And people build things. And that's a wonderful picture of collective imagination of humanity 2010. So you can see what we built. You know, but I think for people of us, who according to Bourdieu have this kind of high taste, right? We find most of them is banal, you know, cliche, etc. But for these people, they're not banal, right? So in fact, you can see with the examples, right? Yeah, sorry, just some sketches for once.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Someone else would like to share his comments? Pierluigi?
I don't know. How you are proposing an ecological model? Because today you have stressed a point, the resistance of a difference from an environment, from a common, from the common patterns you can find in society.
Yeah.
So cultural analytics could structure a sort of complementary project, analysis of normative patterns, the social patterns, attentional normative patterns. And the other hand, another domain or analysis to analyze the individual patterns, and so the diversion, emancipation, other type of practice against the normative patterns.
Yeah, I see.
Is a ecological patterns, but is a sort of resistance.
But I think my feeling is, I feel the way I understand you is what you're asking for. This is what humanities and social sciences have been doing for like 40 years, right? Basically, resistance to the mainstream, right? You know, the kind of support for difference, you know, I mean, whatever, LGBT, whatever you want, right? What I was actually talking, sorry to disappoint, I was talking about something very different. I'm actually questioning what you were better. You know, let's say Durkheim, right? Durkheim starts sociology by looking at suicide rates, right? He said, oh, suicide rates in different countries in Europe are very consistent. Like, the same proportion of people commit suicide every year. So there's some kind of social structure which is bigger than people's differences, than people's uniqueness, and people's individuality, and that's what sociology is. So the whole 100 years, right, 130 years of social science, it's in fact study of common patterns, right? So today sociologists aggregate people by gender categories, income, and so on. What I'm proposing is to say we have a computer. Computer has no problem having a data set inside. Okay, whatever, billion objects, or okay, let's say okay, million. It's Europe, let's go million. Billion would be in America, China, for your million is enough for it. Sorry, just million object, million features, right? There is no aggregation there, right? So my question is, both theoretically and practically, how can we describe, let's say, all the paintings in the Renaissance, or I don't know, all the music composers of the 20th century, without aggregating, without reducing them to style, motif, artistic school? Right? How do we describe, thousands or millions of objects only in terms of their uniqueness and difference? So that's kind of my challenge, right? Because if you're going to be looking, for example, at evolution of forms, right, in art, you identify, maybe I'm very primitive, but you identify a particular form, and when you see maybe how this form changes, but it means you basically look at it as a studying pattern. And what I'm proposing, that maybe it's possible to think about different perspectives where every instance of this form, it's actually unique. So instead of focusing on what's common, iconology, iconography, we're actually focusing on how things are different, right? The way, for example, all the fingertips are different between people, right? That's why police is using it, right? So I'm simply saying that to me, big data suggests this crazy way of thinking potentially. Yes.
Serge.
You propose to focus on what is unfrequent, but you also say that you want to avoid outliers.
Yes.
How can you do that? How practically is it possible?
No, but that was simply, I think this was SAC. Well, yes, sorry, for some reason the projector now I can't connect, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, maybe I was a bit imprecise in that slide because in fact, the next line in the slide was explaining it, right? So to me, outlier, okay, here's all points, and there's this point outlier, so we take it out. But in fact, what I was talking about infrequent, I was thinking about another metaphor, but that was small cultural islands. Small. So maybe not outlier, it may be like actually a very small cluster, but when we do this aggregation, it's too small, so we get rid of it. Right? So let's say today, you go to the city and there's 100 people who just dress like the way people dress in Asia, 100 shades of gray, but if we collect pictures of everybody and then start clustering, these people disappear, because maybe it's just simply too small of a group. So maybe it was a wrong formulation. Maybe what I'm talking about is like just, one is how to include everything, but I think from a cultural point of view, maybe what's interesting is not only something which is unique, but in fact a small cluster, if it works. But sorry, I was imprecise perhaps. Because let's say if you look at all 20th century paintings, you can say, like, okay, Chagall, Matisse is the outlier, but he doesn't make one painting, right? He makes actually 200 paintings, so there is actually a cluster of him. Right? Anyway.
I want to have your reaction about the discrepancy between the computational model and the human.
Yes.
The human research.
That's what I think I was talking about. Thank you.
So, even with the advances of computational model and the improvement of how we can have computers understand image content, image styles, image texture, whatever, we're still as sensitive animals. We act quite differently in a way that maybe we'll never be able to emulate, and that comes also from our personal experience and which cultural form, how do we interact with what we see. So, do you see that as a maybe inherent limitation of using computational models, and then the fact that if you want to use computational methods to maybe find new categories or improve your understanding of a large corpora or find outliers, do you see that as an inherent limitation of this approach, that the human always have to be in the loop at the end for the analysis? Do you see that maybe eventually we'll be able to reach and break this shackles?
Yeah. Well, as you know better than me, right, in the last number of years, right, people started to put human in the loop, right? So there's a type of machine learning or type of data analysis, right, where human is present. Well, so I think that I don't think there's inherent, right, theoretical limitation. So let's say 80 years from now, neuroscience understands, in fact, how different features your eye extract or your have it all glued, you can experience the presentation. It's possible to understand it. And then we can basically build computer models, computer analysis system which will do the same, right? So in theory, it's not impossible, right? It's not physically impossible. In terms of human in the loop, maybe you're thinking about something different, right? What I'm thinking about is that, let's say we extracted 1,000 features, right, from images, and we did some categorization using these features. But we know very well, for example, right, that in terms of human perception, right, the color is very important. So, for example, if I start plotting paintings, right, according to some features, and I zoom out, so each painting is like postage stamp, I think what my brain, first of all, does, it's trying to do grouping by color, right? So in other words, with features, or with doesn't have the same value, and I think so far, people around this table, including me, who are doing it, I don't think we're consciously building it into our analysis, into our models, right? That's why I'm kind of calling for maybe more close cooperation of potential psychology. I mean, our thing is, of course, right? Let's say, right, you analyze some cultural field, and now you have this map, and there is like 50 clusters. Where I got this idea? I got this idea from Maps of Science, right? So people analyze 20 million papers using references, and when you get the Map of Science, I don't know if people have seen it. It was very popular around 2002. So instead of so basically you have papers, clusters of papers. And then you can say, oh, this paper is in biology, this paper is something else. But potentially, like in one analysis from 2002, 2004, we said, okay, we took like 20 million papers using citations, right, references. We clustered them into 600 clusters, and that's contemporary science. So what we said, cluster is not physics, it's not a field, it's simply a bunch of people who publishing and referencing each other, right? The question is, okay, so what do you do, right? So computer, right? So you can say, okay, let's talk about cluster 163, right? But we kind of have a tendency, we want to give them names, right? So I think once we build a map, right? Even practically it becomes very hard, right, to go about names, what categories, right? What do we do with the PCA, right? Or we try to understand what the meaning of these dimensions, right? So it may be not the human in the loop. A human inserts himself or herself in the loop at the end, and maybe we should have computer just analyze it and say that's how computer looks at it. But otherwise, if we don't insert ourselves at the end, then it becomes meaningless for us, right? But maybe you meant something else, so if I misunderstood you, I apologize.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Someone else wants to question to Lev? Probably not. So we thank you very, very much. We are a little late, but we can have 15 minutes coffee break,
Yes.
and I will call the restaurant to say that we'll be there probably at 10 to 1 or something like that. But we need a coffee break.
Good. So technically, I didn't show it.